Okay, John Butler here at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and with me is a special guest, Kris Brown. Kris Brown is the advocate, and she's the head of Brady. So she's the advocate for, against guns, right?
Well, not against guns, but for sensible gun reform.
Okay.
Yes.
And you have some, it's very commonsensical things that you're pushing.
Yes.
Like safety and storing guns.
Correct.
Which is a big deal.
It's
so if you have a gun
deal.
in your home, you need to store it safely.
Yes, you need to end family fire in your home because we lose 8 kids a day in this country.
Wow.
To death or injury because guns are so easily accessible and not safely stored. 65% of Americans die from suicide each year, number one risk factor.
Wait a minute, say that again?
65% of all gun deaths, of the 40,000 that we have, are suicide.
Wow.
With a firearm, the number one risk factor for suicide with a firearm is the presence of a loaded and unsecured gun.
In the home.
Yeah. So safe storage can save the kids who are dying that way, prevent suicide, and 75% of school shooters get their gun from a home where it's not safely stored.
Wow. And so you term that family fire.
Yes.
Correct? And so that would encompass storing the gun safely.
It's all about safe storage.
Okay. Which is?
That is unloaded, firearm unloaded and locked, including trigger lock, but gun safes, they now have actually fairly inexpensive biometric safes.
Yeah.
Easy to use, easily accessed when you need it, but not by your kids, and ammo separate. So firearm unloaded, locked, ammo separate.
Okay. And I do know that the number one killer of children had been car crashes in the U.S., but as I guess with more safety in the car, seat belts and child safety restraints, that has declined, and now it is firearms.
Number one killer of our kids, distinctly, uniquely American epidemic.
So that's inside the home, plus I wonder what percentage is like just random gunfire in a neighborhood.
Well, so about 30% of all gun violence or gun deaths in this country, so of the 40,000 or so, are, let's say, homicides. And it's a very small percentage that are just random, sort of smaller drive-by shootings, but those are normally qualified as homicides. So it is a portion of gun violence.
Yeah.
The much larger portion that is impacting children in particular is about the firearms in the home, and the decisive factor, again, is whether or not they're safely stored.
Okay. Give us some background on Brady.
Yes.
Of course, this goes back to Jim Brady.
Yep.
Who was shot protecting, he was just next to President Reagan, really.
Yeah, he'd been in the job as press secretary at that time for about 3 months.
Yeah.
He was standing at the Hilton Hotel after a public event like presidents have all the time.
Washington, D.C., they have them there all the time.
Correct. And then the shooter, we don't say the shooter's name. There's a no notoriety campaign that's very important, but in this case, historically, it was John Hinckley, obtained the firearm. Jim Brady was grievously injured. He was shot in the head. He died on the operating table and was revived.
Yeah.
Republicans and lifelong gun owners, but they wanted to protect other people from the kind of tragedy they experienced, and they're my heroes.
Yeah. And Jim Brady lived, another 33 years and then died?
He died, and it's interesting that you asked the question because on the autopsy report, he's rendered a homicide because there's no question his life was foreshortened as a result of these injuries.
Yeah. Well, that was rightfully so.
Yeah.
They would put that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what is your... Okay, so you're not trying to ban guns.
No.
But you are trying to ban what's called assault rifles?
Yes, assault-style weapons, yes.
And critics say, well, every gun is an assault weapon. Every knife is an assault weapon. So how do you classify that?
Well, the law that Jim and Sarah Brady helped pass in 1994, the year after the Brady Law was signed into effect, put together a national ban, and really it's based, like all policy, on a description, but it's about muzzle velocity and it's about the firepower of the firearm. So if you are shooting from an assault-style weapon, and gun owners across the country can attest to this, trauma surgeons talk about it much more detail. What's going to happen if you are hit by a bullet that's fired from an assault-style weapon is it's going to rip through your body and ricochet, creating, in essence, this is what we saw in Uvalde, parents who were unable to identify the remains of their children because that's the kind of damage done. So from a policy standpoint, you focus on those two aspects of the firearm, and states across the country are passing these kinds of laws, but we need a national.
Okay, just to clarify, but is that more the bullet, the type of bullet used?
No, it's how the the discharge from the firearm, the muzzle velocity and the trigger speed of that firearm.
And the number of bullets it can carry.
And the rapidity of fire.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's right, the bump stocks, which even President Trump had a regulation to ban bump stocks, right? And that was after the...
It's on both sides of the aisle, I think.
Yes, yes. And so those are the kinds of features that transform a firearm that maybe because you have to pull the trigger again and again and again, which is different with an assault-style weapon. With a bump stock, you can pull once and it keeps firing. And that's why in the situation of Las Vegas, I was there the day after that shooting. Keep in mind, in 9 minutes, he shot thousands of rounds of firearms and killed and wounded 56 people.
That's insane.
It's insane, and most Americans looking at that today, gun owner, non-gun owner, red, blue state, want sensible solutions. And even if folks who are listening to this say, well, I think an assault weapon ban maybe goes too far, think about this. What about restrictions on high-capacity magazines? Because from Brady's standpoint, those are really sensible laws that can have a huge positive impact as well. And you can't use high-capacity magazines on virtually any public hunting property anywhere in this country because it's just not viewed as a fair thing. Right? And so I want to make sure that your listeners understand there are different solutions that can be debated, but the general thrust of this is how can we ensure that we have more sensible approaches to this issue that do not penalize gun ownership, but that ensure that those who are purchasing a firearm aren't prohibited purchasers and that we're helping educate folks about why safe storage is so important.
Well, those are reasonable measures. You're not trying to ban guns overall. You're not against carry laws.
No.
So, but safe storage.
Safe storage. We do want to ensure also that extreme risk protection laws are passed across this country. You don't have one right now in Texas. So extreme risk protection laws allow for the removal of firearms subject to a court order from an individual if that person is at risk to themselves or others. Now 24 states have adopted those laws, and they show, for those who have them, a deep reduction in suicide in the states that have them, and reductions in mass shooting. Florida has that law passed after Parkland, and they have seen confiscation of firearms that with notes about mass shootings that have been averted as a result of that. These laws are deeply, deeply important.
So if the young man who tried to assassinate President Trump, his parents had been on the ball, and
it's a classic example. It's a classic example of where an extreme risk protection law can be utilized to remove firearms and ensure that that person can't have access to them. 100%.
That makes sense. What else would you like to add?
For us at Brady, carrying on the legacy of Jim and Sarah is really about three things. It is about better policy at the state and federal level, of course. It's also, though, about community engagement. And so really what I want to leave people with is it can sometimes feel like, well, I don't have time, I'm not sure what to do. One of the things we want people to do is socialize the conversation about firearms. Let's not vilify the decision to have a firearm. People, this is a deeply personal thing. But let's normalize a conversation. Hey, do you have a firearm? Are you safely storing it? That honestly, if there's one thing that I can leave people with, I hope that's it. We can change the trajectory. And sometimes when I do this with my own friends, they'll say, gosh, actually I do have one. I forgot. It's in the closet upstairs. And why is that so important? Because you may forget where those firearms are, but your kids don't. And that's what gets to me the heart of it as a mom. 8 kids a day. And to sit with a parent who has lost their child with a firearm they own, you never get past that. And I want to avoid that kind of fate for my friends, and I'm sure your listeners want to do that too.
Do you own a gun?
I do not own a gun. I'm married to a Navy veteran who owns a gun, so we do have a gun in the house.
Okay.
That's not
sorry.
my gun.
I had to ask.
Yes, of course. No.
Well, this is far more reasonable than, sometimes there's the crazy outlaw, just do away with all guns, which would be nice, but
we have more guns than people in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think there's a way to square the heritage of gun ownership and the Second Amendment with a balanced interest and the need to protect ourselves and our kids.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for taking time to talk to me.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Good luck with what you're doing.
Thanks so much.
Take
Thanks
care.
for having me.